6:22 in the morning, Medellín, Colombia. The sun has not yet cleared the eastern ridge of the Aburrá Valley, and the city is still gray, still cold, still half asleep. A man in a charcoal hoodie steps out of a co-working space on Carrera 43A, in the heart of El Poblado. He is holding a coffee cup in one hand and a custom-hardened Linux laptop in the other. He takes 3 steps toward the curb. He never takes a fourth. 4 FBI agents and 12 Colombian National Police officers close in on him from 3 directions at once. No shouting, no drawn weapons, just hands. Hands on his wrists, hands on his shoulders, hands prying the laptop from his fingers before it can hit the pavement. Andrés Molina, 34 years old, looks up at the lead agent. He does not run. He does not protest. He says one sentence in soft, accented English. I expected someone eventually. And with that, the largest cryptocurrency laundering operation in the history of the Sinaloa Cartel is over. But the arrest is not the story. The arrest is the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that took 8 months to write. The real story is how one FBI analyst in Miami, staring at a screen at 2 in the morning, noticed a number that should not have existed. A number so small, so technical, so invisible to anyone without a graduate degree in cryptography that it might as well have been a comma in a phone book. And yet that single number, that one repeated mathematical value, would unravel $2.8 billion in fentanyl proceeds, expose 47 previously unknown cartel financial operatives across 9 countries, and put 2 American real estate empires in the crosshairs of a federal grand jury. This is the inside story of Operation VORTEX, how a Colombian software engineer with a gambling problem built the cartel's perfect money laundering machine, how he made one tiny mistake, and how the United States government spent 8 months, 11 days, and 72 hours turning that mistake into the largest crypto mapping breakthrough in the war on drugs. To understand what Molina built, you first have to understand what a cryptocurrency mixer is. In its simplest form, a mixer takes dirty cryptocurrency from many different sources, scrambles it together in a giant digital blender, and returns clean cryptocurrency to the original owners. Imagine pouring 100 different colors of paint into a single bucket, stirring it, and then trying to separate the colors back out. In theory, you cannot. In practice, the more colors you add, and the more skillfully you stir, the harder it becomes for any investigator to trace which dollar came from where. The legal mixers, the public ones, the well-known names that the Department of Justice has been hammering for years, all share a common weakness. They are public. They advertise. They have user interfaces. They leave logs. They get subpoenaed, they get raided, their founders get arrested in airports. Molina watched all of that happen. He took notes, and then he built something different. He built a private mixer, invitation only, no website, no marketing, no customer support, no logs by design. The architecture used a variant of a protocol called CoinJoin, in which multiple users sign a single transaction together so that no outside observer can tell whose input went to whose output. But Molina layered it with custom obfuscation. He added decoy hops. He added time delays. He added what he called bridge wallets, throwaway addresses that lived for hours and then died forever. He called it VORTEX. And for 3 years and 8 months, from March of 2022 to November of 2025, VORTEX processed $2.8 billion United States dollars in Sinaloa Cartel fentanyl proceeds. $2.8 billion. That is more than the gross domestic product of 15 sovereign nations. That is enough money, if stacked in $100 bills, to reach the lower edge of the stratosphere. And it moved through one man's code, in one rented office, in one mid-rise building in Medellín, with nobody outside a very small circle of cartel accountants and one Sinaloa financial coordinator knowing VORTEX existed at all. That Sinaloa financial coordinator has a name, Rafael Escobar-Vega, 44 years old, based in Culiacan. A man who had spent 2 decades on the financial side of the cartel, the side that does not carry rifles, the side that wears button-down shirts and meets with bankers and speaks 4 languages. In the spring of 2022, Escobar-Vega had a problem. The cartel's traditional laundering pipelines, the cash-intensive businesses, the trade-based invoicing schemes, the front companies in Panama and the Cayman Islands were under serious pressure from American and European regulators. The Helix Mixer takedown in 2020 had been a warning shot. Bitcoin fog had fallen the year after. The cartel needed a new pipeline, a private one. And Escobar-Vega had heard about a Colombian engineer, a quiet kid from Bogotá, who had been talking in certain Telegram channels about cryptographic privacy and the architectural failures of public mixers. The engineer had a name and a reputation. He also had, as the cartel quickly learned through intermediaries, a $340,000 gambling debt from a sports betting model that had gone catastrophically wrong over the previous 18 months. The offer came through 3 layers of cutouts, $200,000 up front, $50,000 a month for as long as the system kept running. No questions, no paperwork, no meetings in person, just code and a constant stream of encrypted instructions and money. Molina said yes within 4 days. Now, I want to pause here for a moment because I spent time going through the technical case records that have started to surface in the unsealed filings, and I want to tell you something that the headlines are not going to capture. Andrés Molina was not a hack. He was not some script kiddie. He was genuinely brilliant. He had graduated from Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá in 2013 with a computer science degree, top of his cohort. He had built payment infrastructure at a Colombian fintech startup that processed real customer money for real customers. He had given talks at small regional conferences about elliptic curve cryptography. The code he wrote for VORTEX, when forensic analysts finally got their hands on it, was described in one internal FBI memo as, quote, "the cleanest custom implementation of a CoinJoin variant any of us have ever seen," end quote. He had even built in self-healing features. If a wallet got flagged on a public exchange, VORTEX would automatically reroute around it within minutes. If a node went offline, the system rebalanced. He had thought of almost everything, and that is what makes what happened next so deeply, almost painfully ironic. Because the one thing he forgot was the one thing every cryptography graduate student is taught in week 3 of their first course. On the night of March 17, 2024, at 11:47 local time, VORTEX processed a $4.7 million consolidation transaction. It was a routine sweep, moving funds from a cluster of intermediate wallets into a long-term storage layer. Molina signed it personally from his hardware key in his Medellín apartment. The transaction broadcast across the Bitcoin network at 11:47 and 18 seconds. It confirmed in the next block. Nobody noticed. Not the cartel, not the exchanges, not Molina himself. But inside that transaction's digital signature, inside the cryptographic math that proved Molina had authorized the movement of those $4.7 million, there was a number called a nonce. A nonce, in this context, is a one-time random value. The word literally means used only once. Every time you sign a transaction with this kind of cryptography, the software is supposed to generate a fresh, completely random nonce. Use it once, throw it away, never use it again. The reason is brutal. If you ever, even once, reuse a nonce across 2 different transactions signed by the same private key, anyone in the world with a laptop and undergraduate-level math can solve a simple system of 2 equations and recover your private key. Not crack, not brute force, just solve. Like a homework problem. Molina knew this. Of course he knew this. He had built nonce generation safeguards into VORTEX from the very first commit. But on a piece of legacy code, a helper script he had written years earlier and quietly imported into the system in late 2023, the random number generator was not properly seeded. It was using a deterministic fallback. And on March 17, 2024, that script produced a nonce, a specific nonce, the exact same nonce it had produced on November 22, 2022, 16 months earlier, on an entirely different transaction. 2 signatures, same nonce, same private key, sitting on the public blockchain, forever, for anyone to find, if they knew to look. And this is where the story stops being about a Colombian engineer and starts being about a 31-year-old woman sitting at a desk in a glass-walled office on the 7th floor of the FBI Miami field office. Special Agent Maria Chen, MIT math undergrad, class of 2016, cryptography concentration. She had joined the bureau 3 years out of school after a brief and very lucrative stint at a New York hedge fund that she had walked away from because, as she once told a colleague, she wanted to do something that mattered more than the second decimal place on somebody's quarterly return. She had been on the Miami cyber unit for 4 years by February of 2025, and her side project, the one nobody had asked her to do, the one she ran on a personal AWS instance with her own money, was a Python monitoring script. The script did one thing. It crawled the Bitcoin blockchain looking for cryptographic anomalies, reused nonces, malformed signatures, statistical irregularities in transaction timing. It had been running for 2 years. It had found exactly 3 real hits in that time, all of them tiny and operationally useless. On February 14, 2025, Valentine's Day, at 2:17 in the morning, Chen woke up to a phone alert. The script had flagged a 4th anomaly. She made coffee. She opened her laptop. She looked at the screen, and she saw 2 transactions signed by the same private key with the same nonce, 16 months apart, totaling almost $5 million in linked value. She solved the equations on a yellow legal pad in 20 minutes. She had the private key by 3 a.m. By dawn, she had access to a wallet cluster nobody outside the cartel knew existed, and she knew instantly that she was looking at something enormous. She did not tell her supervisor that day, or the next. She spent 6 weeks building out the cluster map alone, working nights, sleeping at her desk, doing her actual caseload during the day to avoid suspicion. By the end of March, she had identified 1,400 wallet addresses linked to the same key infrastructure, with aggregate flow exceeding $900 million. That was when she walked into the office of Supervisory Special Agent James Harlow and said very quietly, "Sir, I need a war room and 12 analysts, and I need them by Monday." Harlow was a 17-year veteran. He had led the Helix Mixer takedown in 2020. He had seen a lot of things. He looked at her screen for 45 seconds. He picked up his phone. By the following Monday morning, Chen had her war room. The next 8 months were a slow, careful, agonizing process of pulling on a thread without snapping it. Because here was the problem. They had the private key. They could see the wallets, but they did not know who Molina was. They did not even know the operator was in Colombia. The wallet infrastructure was carefully anonymized. The IP traffic ran through layered VPNs, and every signed transaction came through what looked like a Panama-based exchange that itself routed traffic through 3 more jurisdictions. The FBI could see the money. They could not see the man. And here is where obstacle number 1 nearly broke the case. By late June of 2025, Chen's team had narrowed the operator's true IP address to a single building in Medellín, a co-working space called Hub 1 on Carrera 43A in El Poblado, occupying floors 3 through 7 of a glass and concrete tower. They had served a Cloud Act legal order on the Panama Exchange. They had Colombian counterparts conducting passive surveillance of the building from a rented apartment across the street. They had everything except the one thing that mattered: a name. Hub 1 had over 400 active members: software engineers, freelance designers, crypto traders, remote workers, digital nomads. The operator could be any of them. The surveillance team watched the entrance for 3 weeks. They photographed every person who walked in or out. They built a database. They cross-referenced it against Colombian tax records, against social media, against airline manifests. Nothing matched. The case stalled. Harlow flew down to Medellín in mid-July to look at it personally. He sat in the surveillance apartment for 2 days, watching the building, watching the entrance, watching nothing happen. On the second night, he asked the lead analyst a question that would crack the case open. He said, "When does this guy log in? What time exactly?" And the analyst pulled up the logs and said, "Every weekday, between 9:45 and 10:15 in the morning, and again between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Always weekdays. Never weekends. Always those windows. Harlow nodded. He said, then he is not a digital nomad. Nomads work weekends and they work nights. This guy has a schedule like a banker. Pull the photos from those windows only. The analyst pulled them. 11 candidates emerged. 11 men who walked into Hub 1 within that specific window every weekday morning. They ran the 11 faces through a Colombian government facial recognition match. 10 of them came back clean. The 11th came back with a name, Andrés Molina. Computer science graduate, Universidad de los Andes, 2013. Former employee of a Bogotá fintech startup, 2015 through 2020. No criminal record, no flags. Just a face in a database from his national identity card photo, taken when he was 22 years old. The team had its man, but knowing his name was not enough. They needed evidence at trial. They needed him with the laptop. They needed him in the act of operating the system, ideally with the cartel actively using it during the moment of seizure. So Harlow and Chen and the Department of Justice quietly began planning an undercover sting operation, and that planning would consume them for the next 4 months, and it would all come down to a single window of 11 days in November, and a confidential source whose real name has still never been publicly revealed, and who is known in the unsealed indictment only by the codename Romeo 6. Romeo 6 was a Colombian IT security contractor in his early 40s, a man with prior cooperation history with 2 different law enforcement agencies, a man whose reasons for cooperating again have been redacted in every public document. What is known is this: Romeo 6 had a credible cover identity as a money launderer for a smaller regional drug operation, an identity the FBI and the DEA had been quietly building for him for over 2 years before any of this began. When the time came to insert him into VORTEX, the cover held. Through 3 layers of cutouts, the same kind the cartel itself used, Romeo 6 was introduced to a Sinaloa middleman as a new client, looking to clean roughly $2 million in seized but recovered cryptocurrency. The middleman vetted him for 6 weeks. The vetting included, according to one filing, a face-to-face meeting in San Jose, Costa Rica, that lasted 4 hours, and during which Romeo 6 was searched twice, his phone was inspected, and his backstory was probed in detail. He passed. The middleman gave him a VORTEX onboarding contact, a signal handle that operated under one of Molina's bridge identities. Over the course of October 2025, Romeo 6 exchanged 47 messages with that handle, completed a series of small test transactions ranging from $5,000 to $40,000, and was finally cleared to run a larger trial. That larger trial was scheduled after several rounds of back-and-forth scheduling for November 11, 2025, at 3:32 in the afternoon Medellín time. The amount, $750,000. The destination, a clean wallet that the FBI controlled, but that, from the outside, looked exactly like a routine offshore exchange account in Singapore. The 11-day sting had begun on November 3rd. For 8 straight days, FBI and Colombian National Police surveillance teams shadowed Molina around Medellín. They watched him eat lunch at the same arepa place on Calle Diaz every Tuesday and Thursday. They watched him go to a small private gym in Laureles 4 mornings a week. They watched him FaceTime, presumably with his mother, every Sunday evening from a balcony in his apartment building. They built a complete picture of his life, and they noted with growing concern that he was a careful man. He used different routes to work. He varied his lunch hours. He never carried his laptop bag the same way twice. On November 7th, the surveillance team almost lost him for 12 hours when he abruptly changed his routine and stayed home all day. They sweated through it. He emerged the next morning. The team kept watching. At 3:32 in the afternoon on November 11th, Romeo 6 initiated the $750,000 test transaction from a secure terminal in Bogotá. The funds entered VORTEX. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. The amount split into 112 fragmentary outputs, scattered across 41 bridge wallets, time delayed through 3 different decoy chains, and finally consolidated, 71 hours later, into a clean address in Singapore controlled by the FBI. Net laundering fee, 3.8% or $28,500. The funds emerged perfectly clean, untraceable to any normal observer. Untraceable, that is, to anyone without the cryptographic backdoor that Maria Chen had derived from a reused nonce 16 months earlier on her Valentine's Day morning. To the FBI's analysts, watching from Miami, every single fragment of every single bridge wallet was as visible as a flashing neon sign. They had it all: the transaction, the fees, the routing, the fingerprints, the exact moment of Molina's signature, captured in real time. The complete picture of a criminal money laundering operation, performed live, in front of them, with full evidentiary chain of custody. The trap was sprung. Now they just needed the man. And here we close one chapter and open another. Because the technical case was airtight. The surveillance was complete. The undercover sting had worked. But arresting Molina would mean nothing if they could not get him to talk in the next 72 hours, before the Sinaloa Cartel's internal security apparatus realized he was missing, before Rafael Escobar-Vega in Culiacan moved every wallet they could reach to addresses the FBI could not see, before the 8 months of work evaporated into an empty server and a silent suspect. Everything now depended on what happened in an interrogation room in Medellín on the morning of November 13th, with a man who had just been arrested, who had a custom-hardened Linux laptop with what forensic analysts would later estimate as a 1,300-year brute force barrier, who had 2 hardware security keys, who had a personal shorthand notebook full of code only he could read. Everything depended on whether Andrés Molina would flip. The arrest itself, at 6:22 in the morning, went exactly as planned. Special Agent Carlos Reyes was the first to put hands on Molina. Harlow was 3 meters behind him. Chen was in a tactical operations center in Miami, watching the body camera feed in real time, her hands so tight on the armrests of her chair that one of the analysts later said her knuckles had gone white as paper. Molina did not resist. He did not flinch. He looked at Reyes, then at Harlow, and he said the sentence that would become famous within the Bureau in the months that followed. "I expected someone eventually." 6 words. He said them softly, almost with relief. The agents recovered the laptop, the 2 hardware security keys, the personal shorthand notebook from his hoodie pocket, and a coffee cup from the sidewalk where it had fallen. They put him in an unmarked vehicle. They took him to a secured interview suite at a Colombian National Police facility on the north edge of the city. They had 72 hours. The clock was already ticking. The interrogation began at 8:15 a.m. Molina was given coffee. He was given a sandwich, which he did not eat. He was read his rights in Spanish and in English, both languages he spoke fluently. He was offered counsel. He waived counsel for the first 34 minutes. In that opening half hour, while Harlow sat across from him and Chen watched the live feed from Miami, Molina did 3 things. He confirmed his name, he confirmed his date of birth, and he made one statement, unprompted, which read as follows in the verbatim transcript: "I want to understand the position I am in before I decide anything." End quote. Harlow recognized that statement for what it was. It was not a refusal. It was a man asking for information so he could do math. So Harlow gave him math. He laid out, calmly and without theatrics, the charges Molina was facing: conspiracy to launder monetary instruments, operation of an unlicensed money-transmitting business, continuing criminal enterprise. Each one carrying decades. Combined, looking at minimum guidelines well above natural life. Then he laid out the alternative: cooperation, substantial assistance. Section 5, K 1.1 of the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, which would allow the prosecution to recommend a sentence below the mandatory minimum if Molina provided information that materially advanced other investigations. Harlow did not promise a number. He never does. He simply said, "You understand the ranges, and you understand what cooperation can do to those ranges." Molina nodded once, and then he asked for a lawyer. And this is where obstacle number 2 nearly destroyed everything, because the lawyer who arrived 2 hours later was good, very good. A Bogotá-based defense attorney who had handled high-profile narcotics cases before and who knew exactly what was at stake. She conferred with Molina for 90 minutes in a private room. Then she came out and demanded a 4-hour negotiation in the hallway, refusing to allow her client to say another word until she had specific written guarantees about cooperation terms, witness protection eligibility, family safety, and asset preservation. Harlow could not give her written guarantees on the spot. Federal prosecutors do not make written cooperation deals in foreign hallways at noon on a Thursday, but he could not afford to let the clock run out either. Because somewhere in Culiacan, Rafael Escobar-Vega was, by now, almost certainly noticing that his engineer in Medellín had gone silent. The clock was bleeding. Every hour that passed was an hour in which wallets could be drained, evidence destroyed, witnesses moved, the entire ledger structure mutated into something the FBI could no longer read. Harlow stood in that hallway for 4 hours. He worked through prosecutors in 3 different time zones. He had the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida on a conference line. He had the Office of International Affairs at Main Justice on another. He got, eventually, a verbal cooperation framework, contingent on Molina providing specific assistance within a defined window, that he could read into the record on tape. It was the best he could do in the time available. He brought it to the attorney. She read it. She conferred again with Molina. The clock on the 72 hours read 41 hours, 12 minutes remaining. And at 4:18 p.m. on November 13th, Andrés Molina, in the presence of his attorney, 2 FBI agents, and a Colombian liaison officer, agreed to cooperate. He asked for one thing first. He asked for a piece of paper and a pen. He wrote, from memory, a single 37-character string. He slid it across the table. He said, "That is the decryption key to the wallet ledger." What that string unlocked was, in retrospect, the most consequential financial intelligence breakthrough in the modern history of the war on drugs. The wallet ledger was a map, a complete, internally consistent, cryptographically verified map of every wallet the Sinaloa Cartel had used through VORTEX over 3 years and 8 months, 14,000 addresses, $2.8 billion in traced flow, 47 names of previously unknown Sinaloa financial operatives scattered across 9 countries, attached to clusters of wallets and bank accounts the FBI had never known to look at: Mexico, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, the United Arab Emirates, Panama, South Africa, Thailand, Canada, and then, of course, the United States, which is where it got really interesting. In the first 24 hours after the ledger was decrypted, analysts in Miami identified 11 of those 47 operatives. By January of 2026, 2 months later, they had names and confirmed identities on all 47. Arrests began rolling out under careful coordination between the FBI, the DEA, IRSCI, and Europol. One suspect in Madrid, alerted by some still unidentified leak in the chain of custody, fled to a non-extradition jurisdiction the night before his planned arrest. And that flight itself, in the eyes of federal prosecutors, became powerful evidence of consciousness of guilt, the kind of fact that goes in front of a jury and lands like a hammer. The crown jewel of the U.S. side of the ledger, however, was real estate. 2 American holding companies, both incorporated in Delaware with nominee directors and clean-looking paperwork, had together absorbed nearly $80 million of laundered cartel money over the previous 2.5 years. The first was Atlantico Holdings, LLC, headquartered on paper in Miami Beach, which had quietly accumulated $47.5 million in luxury condominiums along Collins Avenue and on Fisher Island. The second was Desert Pinnacle Real Estate, LLC, based in Phoenix and Scottsdale, which had laundered $31.2 million through a portfolio of single-family homes in Paradise Valley and high-end developments in North Scottsdale. And honestly, the strangest part, when you dig into the Atlantico Holdings transactions, is how completely legitimate the paperwork looked on the surface. The corporate filings were immaculate. The property tax payments were on time, every quarter, every year. The HOA fees were paid in full and on schedule. The nominee directors had clean LinkedIn profiles, real-sounding biographies, plausible histories at unremarkable South Florida wealth management firms. If you had walked into the leasing office of any of those Collins Avenue buildings and asked about the owner, the staff would have told you, with complete sincerity, that Atlantico was a quiet family office out of Miami that valued its privacy. There was nothing visible to grab onto. Nothing visible at all. The entire structure was a polished marble facade with absolutely nothing behind it except cartel money, and the only reason anyone now knows that is because Maria Chen noticed a number on Valentine's Day morning. Both companies are now the targets of superseding indictments expected to drop in the first quarter of 2026. 6 superseding indictments in total. Asset forfeiture proceedings are already underway. And here is the part that should make every American who pays attention to housing markets pause. The cartel was not laundering money into American real estate just to clean it. They were laundering money into American real estate to own a position in one of the most stable, inflation-protected stores of value on the planet, while simultaneously distorting local housing markets in Miami Beach, Paradise Valley, and Scottsdale, areas where median home prices have risen far faster than local wages for the last decade. The dirty money was not just hiding, it was bidding. And the people who lost the bidding wars, the local families, the working professionals, the first-time buyers, were competing against laundered fentanyl proceeds and did not know it. Now here is the controversial take, and I will say it directly because I think it matters. Andrés Molina's 72-hour flip was not a moral epiphany. It was not a man finding his conscience. It was rational game theory by a brilliant engineer who looked at the payoff matrix and chose the dominant strategy. He calculated the probabilities. He calculated the sentencing ranges. He calculated the value of the ledger to the prosecution. And he made the move that minimized his expected years in a federal prison. That is not heroism. That is arithmetic. And it raises a real question that the federal cooperation framework has been wrestling with for 40 years. When the people who built the worst systems are also the people most useful in dismantling them, does cooperation serve justice, or does it just create a recurring market for criminal expertise that knows it can always trade itself out of the worst consequences? Reasonable people disagree. The DEA and the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of Florida will tell you, with a straight face, that without Molina's cooperation, 47 cartel operatives would still be free and $78 million in American real estate would still be quietly absorbing the proceeds of fentanyl deaths. They are not wrong, but they are not entirely right either. And the families of the people who died from cartel fentanyl in the 3 years and 8 months that VORTEX was operating do not get a sentencing reduction. Here is the opinion worth standing behind, fully, without hedging. VORTEX's single-engineer architecture was its fatal flaw. Molina built the entire system himself, by design, because he correctly understood that every additional human being who touched the code base was an additional vector for compromise. He was right about that, in a narrow technical sense. But he was wrong in the broader sense, because a single engineer is also a single load-bearing pillar. One brain, one set of hands, one personal shorthand notebook. One small piece of legacy code, imported in a tired moment in late 2023, with a deterministic random number generator that no second pair of eyes ever caught. A team of 3 engineers, reviewing each other's commits, would have caught that nonce generation flaw in the first code review. Molina caught nothing because he was reviewing himself. And the cartel, in choosing him precisely because he was a single point of trust, also chose, without realizing it, a single point of failure. They built a $2.8 billion operation on top of one tired man's gambling debt and one tired man's unreviewed code. Here is something worth sitting with. If you held the decryption key to $2.8 billion in cartel financial records, and you were sitting in an interview room in Medellín with 72 hours on the clock and a federal life sentence on one side of the table and a cooperation framework on the other, what would you do? Not what you think you should do. What would you actually do at 4:18 in the afternoon with a pen in your hand and a piece of paper in front of you and a Bogotá defense attorney whispering in your ear about your mother's safety? Think about it honestly. Tell me in the comments. I read them. There is one more obstacle worth telling you about, because it is the one Molina himself was most haunted by in his cooperation debriefs. According to filings that have begun to surface in the discovery process, Molina told his FBI handlers, in one of the long sessions that followed his initial flip, that he had actually noticed the nonce generation problem himself. He had noticed it in mid-2024, 3 months after the reuse event on the 17th of March. He had written a patch. He had tested the patch in his local environment, and then, in his own words, transcribed from the recorded session. "I thought I had deployed it. I was sure I had deployed it. I closed the ticket in my own tracker. I moved on." He had not deployed it. He had deployed it to a staging branch and never merged it to production. The reused nonce transaction sat on the blockchain, exposed for over 14 months, while its author believed it was no longer a risk. That is the kind of error every working engineer recognizes in their stomach the moment they hear it. The patch you were sure you applied. The deploy you were sure went through. The ticket you closed with a clean conscience because in your memory you did the work. But the system, the actual system, never received the change. Molina lived for 14 months inside a false belief about his own software, and in that 14 months, the United States government found him. The detail from the case that has stayed with me most is not the nonce, it is the notebook. Molina was carrying a small black personal shorthand notebook in the inside pocket of his hoodie when he was arrested. The notebook contained his working calculations, his architectural sketches, his pending bug list, his thinking. All of it written in a private shorthand he had developed over a decade. FBI cryptographers and Colombian linguists have been working through it for the past several months and have decoded roughly 70% of its contents. The very last entry, dated November 11, 2025, 2 days before his arrest, is a partial calculation related to fee optimization on a wallet consolidation he was planning for the following week. It stops, mid-sentence, in the middle of a line of arithmetic, mid-equation, mid-thought. He had set the pen down to do something else, intending to come back. He never came back. That unfinished calculation, that small mathematical fragment trailing off into white space, is, for me, the most human artifact in the entire case file. A man who built a $2.8 billion laundering empire, sitting at a desk somewhere in Hub 1, 48 hours before the end of his life as a free human being, doing arithmetic for next week. Next week never came. A few last details, because the story is still moving. A backup server was discovered in Panama City during follow-up raids in late November, containing redundant copies of the wallet ledger and several months of internal communications between Molina and his cartel handlers. The contents of that server are still being processed and are expected to produce additional indictments through the second and third quarters of 2026. Rafael Escobar-Vega, the Sinaloa financial coordinator who recruited Molina in the spring of 2022, was tipped off in the hours after the arrest and fled Culiacan before Mexican federal authorities could reach his residence. The DEA has posted a $5 million reward for information leading to his capture. He is believed to be somewhere in a Pacific coastal town in Mexico under the protection of the cartel's senior leadership. Maria Chen has been promoted. She is now leading a permanent cryptographic anomaly detection unit at the FBI's Miami field office, with a budget, a staff of 12, and a mandate to apply her monitoring approach across every major mixer and privacy protocol on the public chain. Her Python script, the one she ran on her personal AWS instance for 2 years before any of this began, has been ported into a production federal system. It still runs the same core logic she wrote in 2023. The math, as she put it in a brief internal interview, has not changed. Will the major cartels move away from custom-built crypto infrastructure entirely after Operation VORTEX, retreating back to cash and underground banking? Or will they double down, building more redundant systems, more engineers, more code review, more compartmentalization, with the explicit goal of never again building a billion-dollar operation on top of one tired man's unreviewed pull request? It is a yes or no question. Yes, they retreat. Or no, they adapt and harden. Vote in the comments. One word. The split should be interesting. The wallet map that came out of Molina's 37-character key is now driving parallel investigations by the DEA, IRS Criminal Investigation, and Europol in 9 countries. 6 superseding indictments are expected in the first quarter of 2026. The 2 American real estate empires built on cartel money are facing asset forfeiture proceedings that could permanently change how nominee director structures are scrutinized in U.S. corporate filings. And somewhere in a federal facility, whose location the Bureau of Prisons will not disclose, Andrés Molina is sitting in a cell, almost certainly doing math on whatever scrap of paper he has been allowed, almost certainly thinking through the next problem in his shorthand. The cartel built a perfect machine. They built it on one man. And one man, on one Valentine's Day morning, in a glass office in Miami, looked at a number on a screen and knew exactly what she was seeing. That is how empires fall. Not with raids, not with shootouts, not with helicopters, with math. If you made it this far, you already know what to do. Subscribe to Cybercrime Unit for the deep dives on the cases nobody else is telling at this level of detail. Hit the bell, drop your yes or no in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.